Hello and welcome to The Explainer. We're all so deeply connected to the internet these days, right? I mean, it's kind of hard to picture life without it. But here's the thing. All that amazing connectivity comes with a whole new world of challenges and threats that are always buzzing just beneath the surface. So today, we're going to pull back that curtain and really understand the playbook that keeps our digital world from collapsing.
And it really all boils down to this one question. Keeping our digital lives safe isn't about building some single, impenetrable wall. Nope. It's a constant balancing act. It's a continuous process of managing possibilities. And it all starts with getting a handle on a few key terms.
So first up is risk. Just think of it as the potential for a problem. In the IT world, a risk is basically the chance that something bad could happen to something valuable. And that something valuable, that asset, could be your laptop, a sensitive company database, or even just a single super important email.
Okay, so if risk is the potential for a problem, what actually causes it? Well, that's what we call a threat. A threat is pretty much any force, whether it's natural or man-made, that can cause harm. It could be anything from a hurricane that floods a data center to a hacker actively trying to guess your password.
And finally, how does a threat actually do its damage? It finds a vulnerability. A vulnerability is just a weakness, an opening that a threat can exploit. It's like an unlocked window that a burglar, that's a threat, can use to create the risk of a break-in. See how they all connect? Understanding how these three ideas, risk, threat, and vulnerability, work together is absolutely the key to everything else we're about to cover.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start by defining what information security actually is. Then we'll dive into its three core principles. After that, we'll map out the key areas that need protection, we'll talk about the single biggest vulnerability in any system, and finally, we'll look at the rulebook organizations use to keep it all in order.
So let's get into it. What are we actually talking about here? Well, information system security isn't just one thing. It's really the entire collection of activities and processes an organization uses to protect its digital kingdom. The hardware, the software, the networks, and most importantly, all the data stored inside. Now, all of those protective measures are built on three fundamental principles. You can think of these as the three pillars that hold up the entire structure of digital defense. You'll often hear them called by their acronym AIC. So it all starts with availability, just making sure the right people can get to their information whenever they need it. Because it's no good if your data is super secure, but you can't get to it, right? Next up is integrity, which basically guarantees that the information is accurate and trustworthy, that it hasn't been secretly messed with. And finally, there's confidentiality, which is what most of us think of first, simply keeping secrets secret, making sure data is only seen by people with permission.
And a concept like availability isn't just some vague idea. It's a hard number. It's totally measurable. For example, if a critical system is down for just 30 minutes in an entire month, its availability is 99.93%. That tiny little fraction of downtime, that's the difference between a system you can count on and one that's just a huge frustration. Okay, so we've got our core principles, but where do we actually apply them? In the real world, a typical IT infrastructure is mapped out into 7 distinct areas, or domains. Think of them as different zones that all need their own unique security plan. The best way to picture this is to think about securing a castle. The user domain, that's all the people inside. The workstation domain is their desks and tools. The LAN domain is like the castle's internal courtyard, connecting everybody. The WAN domain connects you to other castles, and the remote access domain is for trusted messengers arriving from far away. The system and application domain, that's the royal treasury where the crown jewels, your data, are kept. And the main gate between your castle and the outside world, well, that one's special. That gate is the LAN-to-WAN domain, and it is critically important. This is the spot where your private internal network connects to the public internet. It is your primary perimeter, your main gate. It's the absolute front line of your defense. Because connecting to the internet means opening your doors to the whole world and all the dangers that come with it. Okay, we've talked a lot about technology, domains, and principles, but here's the thing. protecting all the hardware and software in the world is only half the battle. There's another, much more predictable element we have to think about.
So, let me ask you this. After you've set up all your firewalls, secured your servers, encrypted your data, what is the single biggest threat that's still left? The answer is the user. It's people. Human error, whether it's a simple mistake, carelessness, or even a malicious act, is by far the biggest risk any organization faces. I mean, you can build the strongest digital fortress in the world, but somebody always has to hold the keys. People are and always will be the weakest link.
So, if you can't eliminate human error, what do? How do you manage it? Well, organizations build systems of checks and balances. Yeah, they do background checks, sure, but they also do things like rotating who has access to sensitive data, so no single person holds all the keys for too long. It's all about creating processes that frequently review and audit security plans across all 7 of those IT domains we just talked about.
And that leads us right to our final piece of the puzzle. To manage all this complexity, you've got the tech, the domains, the people. Organizations need a clear, structured rulebook. This is where the IT security policy framework comes into play. And this framework flows from the top down. See, it all starts with the policy, which is a high-level goal set by management. That policy then dictates the standards, the specific technologies you have to use. Those standards are then brought to life through procedures, which are literally the step-by-step instructions. And to help with all of that, you have guidelines, which offer up best practices and helpful suggestions.
Now, a really key part of any security framework is just recognizing that not all information is created equal. I mean, you wouldn't protect a public press release with the same level of intensity as you would your secret formula, right? That's why organizations create standards for classifying their data, usually sorting it into 4 categories: private, confidential, internal use only, and public domain.
And you've seen this in action, maybe without even realizing it. Ever called customer service and the agent on the phone says they can only see the last 4 digits of your account number? That's not a glitch in their system. That is a deliberate security control based on data classification. It means they have access to just enough information to do their job and nothing more. All right, let's do a quick recap of everything we've covered.
Information security is a constant balancing act between risk, threat, and vulnerability. Its foundation rests on those 3 pillars: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These principles get applied across 7 distinct IT domains, but always remember, the user is the weakest link. And to manage all of that, organizations rely on a structured policy framework and clear data classification standards.
So, we've walked through the fundamentals of the information security playbook, from the core principles all the way to how it's used in the real world. The final question I want to leave you with is this. Now that you know how it's all supposed to work, how secure do you really feel about the systems you rely on every single day? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping into an invisible war that's happening all around us, every single second. We're talking about cybersecurity. We're going to uncover the malicious activity, figure out what's really being targeted, look at the weapons they use, and, most importantly, explore the strategies for defense. Let's get into it. Just let that sink in for a second. We all see the huge headlines when a big company gets breached, right? But the truth is, most of the action, the real day-to-day fight in cyberspace, happens completely out of sight. It is a constant, invisible battle. And that's the big question, isn't it? What is this all about? Well, that's exactly what we're here to find out. We are going to explore the threats, the attackers, and the weaknesses they hunt for. Think of this as your front row seat to the world of digital defense. First things first, let's bring this down to earth. This isn't just some abstract concept about code and networks. Cyber threats have massive, real-world consequences for everyday people, for the companies we rely on, and even for entire governments. I mean, these are all true stories. You've got a college student who ends up with a 20-year prison sentence. A huge retailer has to publicly admit they've lost millions of their customers' credit card details. And then there's the one that happens all the time. One person clicks one seemingly harmless email and boom, an entire company is brought to its knees. So, with all this defense, all this effort, what's it all for? The heart of any security strategy really boils down to one simple question. What are we actually trying to protect? And the answer to that is our assets. Now, in the world of cybersecurity, an asset is basically anything that has value. And you might immediately think of, a physical computer or a server rack. But the idea is so much bigger than that. In fact, some of the most valuable assets are the ones you can't even touch. So what are we talking about here? Well, sure, there's the IT infrastructure, the hardware. But think bigger. Think about a company's secret formulas or their source code. That's their intellectual property. Or all their financial data, even just the ability for their website to stay online. We call that service availability. And maybe the biggest one of all, a company's reputation. Let me give you a really powerful example of why protecting this stuff, especially intellectual property, is so critical. Imagine a company, we'll call it Alpha Drug, and they've just developed a revolutionary new medicine. But right before they launch it, a competitor, Beta Drug, hacks in and steals the formula. Just look at the stakes here. Alpha Drug poured $2 billion into developing this, hoping for a $10 billion return. But because that formula was stolen, they lose their entire investment and all of that potential income. A single breach can be absolutely catastrophic. Okay, so we get what's at stake, but who are we trying to protect it from? You hear the word hacker thrown around all the time, but in the security world, things are a little more specific. You can think of it like a spectrum. On one end, you've got your black hats. These are the villains, right? Breaking in for profit or just to cause chaos. On the complete opposite end are the white hats, the ethical hackers. These are the good guys who are hired to find weaknesses so they can be fixed. And then kind of floating in the middle, you have gray hats, whose motives can be, well, a little fuzzy. Now, besides those hat categories, there are two other terms you'll hear a lot. A cracker is basically a type of black hat who is laser focused on one thing, financial gain. And then you have the script kiddie. This is an amateur who uses powerful, pre-made hacking tools without really understanding how they work or the damage they can do. So how do these attackers actually get the job done? I mean, they don't just magically appear inside a network. They use a whole variety of software tools specifically designed to find and exploit weaknesses in a system's defenses. For instance, vulnerability scanners are kind of like automated scouts, constantly probing a system for any known flaws. Port scanners are looking for open digital doors into a network. Sniffers can actually eavesdrop on the data flying across a network, sometimes grabbing things like passwords right out of the air. And keyloggers are these nasty little programs that secretly record everything you type. Okay, so now we know who the attackers are and the kinds of tools in their toolkit. Let's look at the actual mechanics of an attack. How does a security breach happen? Well, it all comes down to the relationship between two really important concepts. First, you have to have a vulnerability. The best way to think of this is like a crack in a castle wall. It's a flaw in the software, a mistake in how something was set up, basically any weakness that creates an opening. And then you have a threat. So if the vulnerability is the crack in the wall, the threat is the army outside that's ready to pour through it. A threat is the person or the event that could actually use that weakness to cause harm. And here's the thing. You can't really eliminate threats. There will always be bad actors out there. So here's the absolute crucial point. An attack happens when a threat successfully exploits a vulnerability. That's it. The entire game of cybersecurity defense is about finding and patching those vulnerabilities, fixing the cracks in the wall before a threat can find them and take advantage. Two of the most common types of malicious software that do this exploiting are viruses and worms. A virus is a lot like a biological one. It has to attach itself to a host, like another program, to spread. It's a parasite. A worm, on the other hand, is a standalone program. It can copy itself and travel across a network all on its own, which can make it incredibly dangerous. All right, we've seen the dangers, we've met the attackers, and we know how they operate. So let's pivot to the most important part. How do we fight back? What are the countermeasures we can actually use to protect our assets? The number one priority is always prevention. Look, having a plan for what to do after you've been attacked is important, but the absolute best strategy is to avoid the attack in the first place. And you do that by finding and fixing those weaknesses we just talked about. Building a strong defense isn't about one single thing. It's about multiple layers. It always starts with the human element, educating people to spot those tricky phishing emails and avoid risks. Then you have the technical tools, like keeping anti-malware software installed and, more importantly, updated. It also means having smart processes, like testing any new software in a safe, isolated environment before you let it loose on your network. And of course, enforcing strong passwords. It all comes back to a basic habit. Just be super skeptical of any file from any source you don't know and trust. And that really brings us to the most important takeaway from all of this. You can't just buy a security product, install it, and think you're done. This world moves at lightning speed, with new threats and new vulnerabilities being discovered every single day.
And that leaves us with this final thought. Security isn't a static wall that you build once and then forget about. It's a continuous, dynamic process of monitoring, of updating, of adapting. So the real question you should be asking yourself isn't, am I secure? But is my security process ready for whatever comes next?
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving deep into something that's, well, everywhere in our digital world, malicious code. You probably know it better as malware. And look, understanding these threats, that's really the first most important step to keeping yourself safe. So let's get into it.
I want you to think about it like this for a second. All your stuff, your photos, your work, your private messages, it's all stored inside a digital fortress. But that fortress, it's being tested, poked, and attacked pretty much constantly. This isn't just some big corporate problem, it's personal. It's about your stuff.
So what is this enemy we're talking about? What is malware? At its heart, it's actually pretty simple. It's just a piece of software, a program, that's designed to do something on your computer that you absolutely did not sign up for. It's code with a secret and usually nasty agenda. So when this stuff gets in, what's actually on the line? Well, it really targets the three big pillars of digital security. First, your confidentiality. It's trying to steal your secrets, your private info. Second, your integrity. It can actually change or scramble your data, making it totally useless. And third, availability. It can just lock you out of your own files, or even bring your whole system crashing down.
Okay, now that we know what they're after, let's meet the culprits. You know, malware isn't just one thing. It's kind of like a whole ecosystem of different digital pests, and each one has its own special way of causing trouble. These are the tools in the attacker's toolbox.
Let's start with the classic you've definitely heard of, the virus. And honestly, the name is perfect. Just like a real-world virus, it can't survive on its own. It has to latch onto a host, like a program you already have. And the moment you run that program, bam, the virus wakes up, copies itself, and starts spreading to other files on your computer. And then there's an even sneakier method, the Trojan horse. You remember the story from Greek mythology, right? Well, this works exactly the same way. You download something that looks totally fine, maybe a game or a useful utility. But hiding inside is the malicious code. You literally open the gates and invite it into your fortress yourself. The bad stuff only happens later.
Some malware is built to play the long game. This one's particularly devious. A logic bomb is a piece of code that just sits there, dormant, totally invisible, waiting for a specific trigger. It could be a date on the calendar, or maybe when a certain employee's name is removed from a list. It's a digital time bomb, just ticking away silently.
And then, of course, there's the malware that's just plain creepy. Spyware. This is your digital stalker. It installs itself quietly, runs in the background, and just watches. It logs your keystrokes, your browsing history, your passwords, your private information, all without giving you a single clue that it's even there. Now, people get these two mixed up all the time, so let's break it down. Virus versus worm. Here's the key difference you need to remember. A virus needs a ride. You have to do something, like open an infected file to help it spread. A worm? A worm is a totally different beast. It's an independent traveler. It can replicate and spread all by itself across a network, jumping from computer to computer by exploiting security holes. No human help needed. So, we've met the different types of malware. But how does an attacker actually use these tools to cause a security breach? I mean, what does an attack really look like? To properly defend our fortress, we've got to understand the attacker's playbook, step by step.
Before we get to the how, we have to understand the why. What makes someone do this? Well, it pretty much always comes down to one of these four things. Money is huge. We're talking theft, extortion, ransomware. Some people do it for fame, for the bragging rights in certain circles. For others, it's about ideology, pushing a political message. And sometimes, it's just plain old revenge.
See, a real attack isn't a single event. It's a process, a campaign. It starts with reconnaissance. That's the attacker scoping out your fortress, looking for a weak spot on the wall. Then comes step 2, gaining access. They find a vulnerability and use it to get inside. But they're not done. Step 3 is maintaining access. They'll install backdoors so they can get back in whenever they want. And the final critical step, covering their tracks. They delete logs and hide evidence so you'd never even know they were there.
Okay, we've seen the threats, we've seen how a breach happens. It can feel a little overwhelming, I know. But here is the most important part. We can absolutely fight back. So now, let's talk about the countermeasures. Let's talk about how we build a stronger digital fortress.
The single most powerful strategy in all of cybersecurity is called defense in depth. And the idea is brilliant. You don't just build one big wall. No, you build layers. You have a moat, then a tall outer wall, then archers on the wall, and then a fortified keep inside. That way, if an attacker gets past one defense, there's another one right behind it, waiting for them.
Our first layer of defense is right there on the front line, the applications you use every single day. This is the basics, but it's crucial. We're talking about having good antivirus software on everything and, this is key, keeping it updated. It means scanning that USB drive a friend gives you before plugging it in, and using a personal firewall to act as a traffic cop for your computer.
Okay, digging one layer deeper, we have to secure the foundation of the fortress itself, the operating system like Windows or Mac OS. This is all about good digital housekeeping. When a security patch comes out, install it. Don't wait. Only get your software from places you trust. You can even go in and turn off extra services you don't use, basically reducing the number of doors an attacker could even try to open.
And finally, we have the outermost layer, the moat and the drawbridge, your network. This is about securing the connections to the outside world, using filters to block known bad websites and emails, having systems that are constantly watching the traffic, looking for anything suspicious, and, just like with your computer, making sure your router and other network gear always had the latest security updates.
Now, check this out. This is one of my favorite counter moves security pros use. It's called a honeypot. They actually set up a fake system, a decoy, that's designed to look juicy and valuable to an attacker. They intentionally make it look vulnerable to draw the bad guys in. This lets the security team watch the attackers in a safe sandbox, see what tools they're using, learn their methods, and then use that knowledge to protect the real systems. It's brilliant.
So, we've talked about all these layers of technology, antivirus, firewalls, network security, but after all that, it really leads to one final huge question. With all of this tech in place, what is the most important layer of all? Could it be that the strongest, or for that matter, the weakest, link in the entire chain is you? Your own awareness might just be the ultimate defense.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're talking about how to secure your digital fortress. Yeah, your fortress. And more importantly, how you can defend it.
I mean, think about it for a second. Your entire life is online, right? From your bank info to your private messages. So what's actually stopping someone from just taking it? I can tell you right now, it's a heck of a lot more than just a simple password.
So let's use a metaphor here. Imagine your digital life is this giant, sprawling fortress. Well, any fortress worth its salt relies on two main things to stay safe. You've got the big, strong gates, and you've got the secret codes to pass messages around. We're going to start with the guy at the gate, the gatekeeper.
Okay, pillar number 1, the gatekeeper. This is all about access control. Basically, who gets to walk through the front door and who gets told to beat it.
So what exactly is access control? Honestly, it's pretty simple. It's the bouncer at a club checking IDs. It's the lock on your apartment door. It's any system that's just there to do one job. Make sure that only the right people are getting in. And, getting access isn't just one simple thing. It's actually a 4-step dance. Picture a really thorough security guard. First, they'll ask for identification. Who are you? That's your username. Then comes authentication. Okay, prove it. That's where your password comes in. Step 3 is authorization. All right, you're in. Now, what are you allowed to do? Like, can you just look at stuff or can you actually edit things? And finally, there's accountability. So, what you do while you were here. Everything you do gets logged, so there's always a record. And this whole access control thing, it happens in 2 different worlds. You've got physical access control, stuff you can actually touch. We're talking locks, doors, key cards for the office. Then you have logical access control. This is the invisible stuff, the code that lives in our computers. Your passwords, file permissions, firewalls, that's all logical. And for your fortress to be really secure, you absolutely need both. Okay, of those 4 steps, let's zoom in on one that is absolutely critical. I'm talking about authentication. That's the prove it step. Because really, how does a computer know that you are who you say you are? Well, it turns out there are really only 3 ways to prove who you are to a machine. The first is something you know, like a password or a PIN. The second is something you have, a physical key or one of those little security tokens. And the third, and this one's huge now, is something you are. We're talking biometrics, your fingerprint, your face, your eyeball. And here's something you really need to get. These methods are not all equal. Passwords, that something you know, are by far the oldest and frankly the weakest link. They get stolen, gassed, cracked all the time. That's why for anything you actually care about, the absolute bare minimum should be 2-factor authentication. You need to combine at least 2 of those methods. So let's dive a little deeper into that third one, the something you are category. Yeah, I'm talking about biometrics. It's everywhere now, right? You unlock your phone with your face, you pay for coffee with your thumbprint. It's completely taken over. But here's the thing with biometrics. There's a big trade-off. The good stuff is pretty obvious, right? You literally have to be there. There's no password to forget, and it's super hard to steal someone's face. But the downsides are pretty serious too. Your physical traits can change over time, the tech can be slow or super expensive, and then there's the big one, privacy. Who owns your fingerprint data? Kinda scary when you think about it. And all this leads to what's called the accuracy dilemma. See, every one of these systems has to be tuned just right. If you make it too strict, you get a high false rejection rate. That's when it's you, but your phone says, nope, super annoying. But if you make it too loose, you get a high false acceptance rate. That's when an imposter gets in. And that's a disaster. So it's this constant battle trying to find that perfect balance. Okay, so the gates are secure, we've got our bouncer, but what about the messages flying around inside the fortress? What happens if a spy grabs one of those messages? Well, that brings us to pillar number 2, cryptography. This is all about the secret language. So what is cryptography? At its heart, it's just the art of scrambling messages. You take normal, readable info, that's called plain text, and you use a secret key to turn it into total nonsense. That nonsense is called ciphertext. But here's the magic trick. If you have the right key, you can instantly unscramble it right back into plain text. It's pretty amazing. Now, here's a super important point that a lot of people get wrong. There is no such thing as an unbreakable code. Seriously, with enough time, enough money, enough computing power, anything can be cracked. So the real goal of cryptography isn't to be unbreakable. The goal is to make it so ridiculously expensive and time-consuming to break that nobody would ever bother. You want to make breaking the code cost way more than the secret itself is even worth. So how does this scrambling actually happen? Well, there are 2 main flavors. First, you've got symmetric key cryptography. This is easy. It uses one single shared key to both lock and unlock the message. Think of it like a house key. You and I both have a copy, we can both get in. The other kind is asymmetric key. This one's a bit more clever. It uses 2 keys. There's a public key that you can give to everyone. Anyone can use it to lock a message and send it to you. But only you have the matching private key to unlock it. The best analogy is a mailbox with a slot. Anyone can drop a letter in, but only you have the key to get the mail out. And this whole 2-key system makes something amazing possible, the digital signature. And let's be clear, this is not a scanned image of your signature. No. This is a powerful cryptographic seal that proves a message is the real deal and that no one has messed with it. Okay. To get how this works, we need to talk about something called a hash function. Just imagine it's a special machine. You can feed it anything, an email, a picture, a whole movie, and it spits out a short, unique code. This is its digital fingerprint. And the crucial part is, if you change just one tiny thing in the original file, like a single comma in that email, the entire fingerprint changes completely. It's that sensitive. So, here's how the magic trick is done. First, your computer creates that unique digital fingerprint, the hash of your message. Then, and this is the really cool part, you use your private key to lock up just the fingerprint, not the whole message, just the fingerprint. That locked up fingerprint, that is the digital signature. It gets stuck onto the message and off it goes.
And what does this little trick get you? Well, it gives you 3 massive guarantees. First, integrity. The person who gets the message can check the fingerprint to make sure nothing was changed. Second, authentication. Since only your public key can unlock the signature, it proves it came from you. And third, something called non-repudiation. It's a fancy word, but all it means is you can't deny sending it. It's like a digital "I was here," and it's ironclad.
So, we've gone through all of this, and it all really comes down to just one number: 2. Your entire digital fortress is built on these 2 pillars. You've got access control, standing guard at the gates, checking IDs, and you've got cryptography, which is the secret code that keeps all your messages safe inside the walls. If either one of those pillars crumbles, the whole fortress is at risk.
But here's the thing to leave you with. The bad guys are always getting smarter. The threats are always evolving. So the big question isn't just, is my fortress secure today? It's, how will my fortress need to change for tomorrow? Because as the attacks get more sophisticated, our defenses, our gatekeepers, and our secret codes, they're going to have to evolve right along with them. And that's the challenge.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the world of network security. We're going to break down the real risks we all face online and then look at the essential tools that, actually keep our digital lives safe. So let's get right into it. I mean, it's a question we should all be asking ourselves, right? Every single time you go online, you're walking into a world with all sorts of invisible threats. So how safe are you really? And that right there is the heart of the problem. It doesn't matter if you're a giant corporation or just checking email at home. Every single thing you send, your messages, your passwords, company secrets, it can all be intercepted, watched, or even changed while it's flying across the network. This is exactly why network security is so incredibly critical. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the risks out there in our vulnerable digital world. Then, we'll talk about building up our defenses. After that, we'll tackle the unique challenges of Wi-Fi, learn how to seriously fortify our wireless networks, and then we'll wrap it all up with the ultimate security strategy. Okay, first up, let's get a lay of the land. What are the actual threats we're talking about here? What kind of dangers are lurking on any given network? Well, it really boils down to 3 main categories of trouble. First, you've got network reconnaissance. That's the bad guys doing their homework. Then there's eavesdropping, which is pretty much what it sounds like. And finally, you have denial of service attacks, which aren't about stealing, they're about pure disruption. Think of network reconnaissance like a thief scoping out a building before a heist. An attacker is just gathering intel. They're looking for weak points, unlocked digital doors, and any vulnerabilities they can exploit later. They use all sorts of tools to map out your network and find the easiest way in. Eavesdropping is just someone listening in on a conversation that isn't theirs. And on a wired network, if an attacker can physically get to the cables, it's shockingly easy for them to just tap in and see everything. This is precisely why encryption is your best friend. Even if they can grab your data, encryption makes it all just unreadable garbage to them. Now, a denial of service, or DOS attack, is different. The goal isn't theft, it's to create chaos. The source material has a perfect analogy for this. Imagine your network is a water pipe. A DOS attack is like someone jamming that pipe full of mud and rocks, just flooding it with junk data so nothing legitimate can get through. Now, what if that junk data was coming from thousands of computers all at once? That's a DDoS, a distributed denial of service attack, and it is powerful enough to knock even the biggest websites completely offline. So, we've seen the scary stuff, now for the good news. How do we actually fight back? Let's get into our first line of digital defense and look at the tools that protect our networks. Our most basic tool is the firewall. It's like the gatekeeper for our network. And they've gotten a lot smarter over the years. The first generation, the packet filter, was super simple. It checked every little piece of data against a list of rules. Kinda slow. Then came stateful inspection, which was a huge improvement because it could remember conversations. But really, the gold standard today is the application proxy. It's like a super smart middleman that doesn't just check the address, it actually opens up the package to see what's inside. That's the highest level of security. Okay, but what if you need to connect two offices that are miles apart? You can't just send sensitive company data over the public internet, right? That's a huge risk. This is exactly where virtual private networks, or VPNs, come in. They create this secure, encrypted, private tunnel right through the public internet. It's like having your own secret highway. And there are a few key technologies that make these tunnels work. You might still see some older ones like PPT, but today most modern VPNs use one of two main types. You've got SSL, which is often what you use when you connect from your laptop, which is one click. And then there's the more heavy-duty IPsec, which is often used to connect entire corporate networks together securely.
And finally, let's talk about network access control, or NAC. The best way to think of this is like a strict bouncer at a nightclub. Before NAC lets any device onto the network, it does two things. First, authentication. It checks your ID to make sure you are who you say you are. Second is posture checking. It gives your device a quick pat-down to make sure your antivirus is up to date and your firewall is on. If you don't pass both checks, you're not getting in. Simple as that.
All right, let's switch gears and talk about something we all use literally every day: Wi-Fi. It's amazing, it's convenient, but all that convenience comes with its own unique and pretty serious security problems.
So this is the absolute key difference you have to understand. With a regular wired network, an attacker has to physically get to the cables to do anything. But with Wi-Fi, the signal is just out there. It's being broadcast through the air. Radio waves go through walls. That means anyone in range, your neighbor, a person in a car on the street, could potentially be listening in. It just makes wireless a much, much easier target.
So, given that Wi-Fi is just naturally more exposed, how do we lock it down? How do we take something that could be flawed and turn it into a fortress? Let's dig into the protections made specifically for Wi-Fi. You know, the history of Wi-Fi security is basically a constant arms race. The original standard, WEP, which goes all the way back to the 80s, turned out to be really, really flawed. So the experts came up with WPA as a better replacement. But then attackers found ways around that too, which finally led us to the modern standard we have today, WPA2. That is the one you absolutely need to be using. And to really drive home how ridiculously bad WEP was, I love this quote from the source material. It says that using WEP is like using a Captain Crunch decoder ring to protect their data. It's hilarious, but it makes a deadly serious point. Using old, broken security is almost worse than having none at all because it gives you this false sense of safety. Now, beyond just strong encryption, there are a couple of other layers you can add. You can disable SSID beaconing, which basically stops your network from shouting its name out to the whole neighborhood. You can also use MAC address filtering, which is like creating a VIP guest list for your network. Only pre-approved devices can even connect. They both add another hurdle for an attacker to jump over. Okay, we've covered a ton of ground. From the basic risks to firewalls to locking down your Wi-Fi, now it's time to bring it all home and talk about one powerful, overarching strategy. Here is your simple, actionable checklist. First, try to manage your Wi-Fi signal strength so it doesn't bleed too far outside your home or office. Second, and this is non-negotiable, always use WPA2 encryption with a long, complicated password. And third, if you're in a bigger office, look into using a Radius server. That's a system that gives every single user their own unique login, which is way more secure than everyone sharing one Wi-Fi password. And this is it. If you take away just one thing from all of this, let it be this. Good security is not about finding one single magic bullet. It's about building layers. You have to assume that any one defense can fail. Your real goal is to build a system where an attacker has to break through multiple different kinds of defenses. That's what a strong security posture really looks like. So I'll leave you with this to think about. Your network might have a firewall, and that's like the outer wall of your castle. But what about the guards? What about the locked doors inside? What about the vault? How many layers does your defense truly have? That's all for this edition of The Explainer.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're not just going to talk about a bunch of security rules. No, we're going to be architects. We are going to build a digital fortress piece by piece to protect what is maybe the most valuable asset in the entire modern world.
And that right there is exactly what's at stake. You know, every fortress is built to protect something, right? And in our case, it's the data. This is the treasure, the crown jewels that our entire security operation is designed to defend.
Every great construction project needs a blueprint, and this is ours. We're going to start with the basics. Who are the guardians, and what are the rules of the land? Then we'll shift our focus to the human element, which, let's be honest, is often the weakest link. After that, we'll dive into the actual fortress blueprints, figure out how to manage the place day to day, and finally, make sure every single tool inside is built to be secure right from the start.
Okay, first things first. Before you can even think about laying a single stone, you've got to know who's in charge and what laws they have to follow. This is the world of security administration and compliance. So let's meet the master architects, the security administration team. These folks don't just draw up the plans, they oversee the entire project, from start to finish. Without them, you just have chaos. Different crews building walls that don't connect, gates that don't lock. They're the ones who make sure there's one single coherent vision for the whole fortress.
So what is the core job of these guardians? Well, it really boils down to controlling access. And they do that with 4 key steps. First up, identification. You claim who you are, like with a username. Second, authentication. You have to prove it with a password or fingerprint. Third, authorization. Once you're in, we decide what you're actually allowed to see and do. And fourth, accountability. We keep a log of everything, just in case something goes wrong.
And our guardians? Well, they have to follow 2 different sets of rules. On one side, you've got regulatory compliance. Think of these as the external laws of the land, government regulations that every organization has to follow, period. But then, on the other side, there's organizational compliance. These are the internal rules, the company's own policies and standards. To have a truly secure fortress, you have to obey both. You know, a fortress is only as strong as the people inside it. Technology is one thing, but the human element, that's often the biggest challenge. But if you manage it correctly, it can be your greatest asset.
This brings us to a foundational security principle. Think about it. You wouldn't give every single guard in a castle the key to the treasure room, would you? Of course not. It's the exact same idea here. The principle of least privilege means people get access only to what they absolutely need to do their job, and nothing more. This one simple rule can dramatically reduce your risk.
And here's another really powerful idea for preventing fraud: separation of duties. You make sure that no single person controls a critical process from start to finish. For example, the person who's allowed to add a new vendor to the payment system should not be the same person who could approve payments. That simple split makes it so much harder for someone to, say, create a fake company and just start paying themselves.
And the defense is they don't stop there. There are other really clever human-focused tactics. Things like job rotation, where you move people between different roles, that can uncover irregularities pretty fast. Mandatory vacations are a big one too. It forces someone else to step in and do a person's duties, which can reveal any fraudulent activity they were trying to cover up. And maybe most important of all is security awareness training, which helps turn your employees from potential risks into your absolute first line of defense.
All right, so we've established our crew and we've talked about managing the human element. Now it's time to look at the actual architectural plans, the documents that define how our fortress is built and how it operates. This is really the core infrastructure for any IT security policy.
Now, security documentation isn't just one giant rulebook. It's a hierarchy. It's a whole system. Let's walk through an example. It all starts at the top with a high-level policy, something like all company data must be encrypted. From that, a standard is born, like all employee laptops must use BitLocker encryption. Then a procedure document gives IT the step-by-step instructions for how to actually enable BitLocker. The baseline makes sure every new laptop has it enabled from day one, and finally, a guideline might suggest that employees also encrypt their USB drives. See, it's a full system, from a broad vision all the way down to a specific action. Of course, not all treasure is created equal. So before you can even protect it, you have to classify it.
you have to know what you're dealing with. And data is typically assessed on 3 core criteria. First, its value. What's it actually worth? Second, its sensitivity. How damaging would it be if this leaked? And third, its criticality. Does the whole operation grind to a halt if we lose access to this?
So why bother with all this labeling? Well, the benefits are actually huge. It lets you focus your most expensive, heavy-duty security controls on your most valuable data, which saves a ton of money. It creates a standard language for security across the whole company. It reminds employees to handle sensitive data with care. And, oh yeah, it's often required to comply with privacy laws. So, pretty important.
So our fortress is built, the blueprints are crystal clear, the treasure's all been classified. The work is over, right? Not even close. A digital environment is constantly changing, so we have to manage that change very, very carefully. This brings up a really key distinction. On one hand, you have configuration control. That's all about making sure the fortress stays the way it was designed. No unapproved changes to the walls or windows. On the other hand, you have change control. That's the formal process you follow when you actually want to add a new gate or build a new tower. One is about preventing random changes, the other is about managing planned ones.
A proper change management process isn't about preventing change. It's about managing it safely. It's a structured, deliberate process, and the goal is really simple. Make upgrades and improvements without accidentally knocking a new hole in the fortress wall. We're at our final section. We've built the walls, we're managing the environment, but what about the tools, the applications, and maybe even the weapons that we use inside? They have to be secure from the ground up.
Any software that's built for the fortress has to have security baked in from day one. It's not an afterthought. The architects, the developers, they should be asking, does it properly check a user's identity and their permissions? Does it reject malicious data? Is the source code itself locked down and controlled? And, critically, are we keeping our developers and our test environments completely separate from the live production environment? These aren't optional extras. These are the essential foundations.
So, what are the crucial takeaways from our big architectural project today? First, the Security Administration Team. They're the master architects leading this whole effort. Second, compliance with both government regulations and your own internal policies is absolutely non-negotiable. Third, never ever forget that your employees, when you train them right, are your most important security asset. And finally, all changes to the fortress have to be controlled. Otherwise, you risk creating the very vulnerabilities you're trying so hard to prevent.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought. Every single app you use, every online service you sign up for, it's its own little digital fortress, and it's protecting your personal information. After seeing everything that goes into building one correctly, it really makes you wonder, how confident are you in their architects?
All right, welcome. We talk a lot about building a digital fortress to keep our data safe. But what happens after the walls go up? Today, we're going to dive into why security isn't some set-it-and-forget-it task. It's actually a constant process of checking the locks, watching the guards, and even testing the walls. So think about it. You've spent all this time, all this money, building that fortress. But things change, right? Threats evolve. Your business grows. You install new software. So the real question is, are the defenses you built last year, or even last month, still going to hold up today? Are those guards still awake? And, maybe more importantly, are they even watching for the right kind of threat?
Okay, so the very first step in answering that question is something called a security audit. The best way to think about it is like an annual physical for your company's digital health. It's that scheduled, really deep dive examination to make sure everything is still strong and doing exactly what you expect it to do.
So what exactly is a security audit? Well, put simply, it's a formal process to check on 2 really key things. First, are people actually following the security rules you wrote down? And second, are your tech defenses still working? And, this is a big one, do they still make sense for how your business actually operates today? It's all about closing that gap between what you say you do and what you actually do.
But listen, this isn't just about ticking boxes for some compliance checklist. Audits serve a super important purpose. On the inside, they make sure your security rules still match how people actually work and that your tools are all up to date. And that directly lowers your risk. And on the outside, a clean audit builds confidence. It's you proving to your customers that you take protecting their data seriously. That's huge.
A big part of an audit is looking at permission levels. And it's fascinating to see how this works.
It's a whole spectrum. On one end, you've got promiscuous. That's kind of like your home network, where you pretty much trust everyone. Then you move up to prudent, which is your typical business setting, where you only allow what's absolutely necessary. And then way over on the far end, you have paranoid. Think top secret facilities. A good audit makes sure you're using the right level for the right situation. Okay, so we get why we need to audit, but what does the process actually look like? It's definitely not a random inspection. Good auditors follow a very clear playbook to make sure that checkup is thorough and actually valuable every single time. And that playbook really has 4 logical steps. You start by defining the scope, basically deciding, okay, what are the most important high-risk areas we need to focus on? Then you choose your benchmark. That's the standard you're going to measure everything against. Once that's set, you go gather the evidence. And finally, and this might be the most important part, you report what you found and you follow up to make sure things actually get fixed.
So what does good even look like in this context? Auditors don't just use their personal opinion, that's for sure. They use established benchmarks. This could be a company's own internal rulebook, or it could be respected industry standards. For instance, they might use ISO standards for general security management or NIST frameworks, which are really common in government, or even something like COBIT for IT governance. Each one gives them an objective ruler to measure against. So how do the auditors get all this information? Well, they use a whole mix of techniques to get the full picture. They'll do interviews to understand the human side of things, they'll review documents to check the official policies, and they'll just observe how people actually do their work. And then, of course, they get hands-on and directly review system configurations to see if the technology is set up the way the paperwork says it is.
Look, an audit is only useful if it actually leads to change. The whole thing doesn't just end when the data is collected. It wraps up with an exit interview to share what they found right away, and then a formal report with clear, actionable recommendations. But the most critical step is that last one, scheduling a follow-up. That accountability is what turns a report sitting on a shelf into real, tangible security improvements.
So, audits are your periodic health checkups. Awesome. But what about the day-to-day grind? I mean, you wouldn't just check your heart rate once a year and assume you're fine, right? Security needs constant, 24/7 vigilance. And that's where we make the shift from auditing to monitoring. This right here is the best way to think about the difference. In audit, that's a snapshot, a super detailed picture of your security at one specific moment in time. But monitoring is the movie. It is the continuous, real-time film of everything that's happening on your network, second by second, day by day. And this movie really has 2 different camera angles. First, you've got your real-time monitoring. Think of tools like an intrusion detection system or IDS. They're actively watching for shady stuff as it's happening. The second angle is non-real-time, stuff like system and application logs. These create a historical record, so you can go back and investigate an incident after it happened. You absolutely need both to be effective. So with all these logs coming in from your firewalls, your servers, your apps, you end up with a literal mountain of data. How in the world do you make sense of it all? Well, that's where a CM comes in. A CM system is basically the command center for all your security logs. It pulls in data from everywhere, sorts it all out into a common format, and gives you one single place to analyze it, run reports, and spot trouble way, way more easily. Okay, we've covered looking back at the past with audits and watching the present with monitoring. Now we get to the most proactive part of this whole cycle, security testing. This is where you actively go looking for weaknesses in your own fortress before an attacker gets the chance.
I love this quote. It just puts the whole process into perspective perfectly. If auditing is reviewing the past and monitoring is watching the present, then testing is all about preparing for the future. It's not about finding blame. It's about finding the cracks in the wall so you can fix them before they become a real problem. So what exactly gets tested? The focus is on your most critical defenses. You test your intrusion detection to see if the alarms actually go off. You poke and prod at your DMZ, that's your demilitarized zone, to make sure there are no gaps between your public servers and your private network. You review system hardening to be sure you've turned off any unnecessary stuff that could be exploited. Every single test is designed to answer one question. Is this thing actually working? A good test isn't just random poking around. It follows the same roadmap an attacker would. It kicks off with reconnaissance, just gathering public information. Then comes network mapping, to figure out the layout of the system. With that map, testers run vulnerability scans to find potential weak spots. The next step is penetration testing, where they actively try to exploit those weaknesses. And it all leads to the final and most important step, mitigation, where you plan how to fix the holes they found. And this is where it all clicks together. These aren't separate things you do once in a while. They are a continuous, reinforcing cycle. An audit might find something you need to monitor more closely. Your daily monitoring might spot a weird anomaly that needs a specific test. And the results of that test, they drive improvements that are going to get checked in your very next audit. It's a loop. Audit, monitor, test, and always improve. You know, the biggest thing to take away from all this is that security is never done. It is a living, breathing process that constantly needs your attention. So we'll leave you with this question to think about. If your security is a living thing, what's its pulse look like today? Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into two super critical sides of digital security. You've got the offense. That's thinking like a hacker to find the weak spots. And then you've got the defense, building our stuff to be rock solid from day one.
And really, this is the question at the heart of it all, right? It's what drives this whole conversation. I mean, you can't just sit around and wait for a breach. You've got to be proactive, get ahead of the game. All right, let's jump right in. We're starting with the fun stuff, penetration testing. And yeah, that's basically a fancy way of saying you get permission to hack your own stuff to find all the cracks. Okay, let's get one thing straight because this is so important. This is all completely legal and authorized. The whole point isn't to break things for fun. It's to find the holes, prove they're there, and then get them patched up before a real baddie finds them first. And this is a really key difference you need to get. A vulnerability assessment, that's kind of like walking around a building and making a list of all the unlocked doors. But a penetration test, well, that's when you actually try to jiggle the handle, open the door, and walk inside. One just points out a problem, the other proves it can be exploited. You know, this quote just nails it. It's all about the mindset. An ethical hacker has to think and act exactly like a malicious one. The closer you can get to a real-world attack scenario, the more you're going to learn. So, not all tests are the same. They come in a couple of main flavors. You've got white box testing, where the hacker gets all the inside info, the blueprints, the source code, the whole shebang. It's super thorough. Then you have black box testing. Here, the tester knows almost nothing, just like a real attacker on the outside. It's all about realism versus getting every single detail. Okay, so how does this actually work? It's not just some random, chaotic hacking. No way. A real professional pen test is super structured. It follows a very specific step-by-step process. And here they are, the 5 phases. It all starts with gathering info and goes all the way through to writing up that final report. First up, Phase 1, reconnaissance. And honestly, this might be the most important step of them all. Seriously, the more you learn here, the better your chances later. You've got passive recon, which is like being a detective online, digging through public info. Then there's active recon, where you start to, poke the target a little bit more directly. All right, Phase 2 is scanning. Now you take all that info you gathered and you start getting technical. You might start with something simple like a ping, just to see if the lights are on. Then you fire up a tool like Nmap to find all the open doors and windows. We call them ports. And from there, you can use something like Nessus to check if any of those open doors have a known faulty lock. And here we go. Phase 3, exploitation. This is the big one. This is the moment you actually break in. You take one of those vulnerabilities you found, you exploit it, and you gain access. The whole goal is to deliver what's called a payload. That's the piece of code that gives you control. But, getting in is only half the battle. Now you're in Phase 4, post-exploitation. Think about it. If the system reboots, you could get kicked out. So the goal here is to make your access persistent. You might install a backdoor, a secret way to get back in later, so you don't lose all your hard work. And last but absolutely not least, Phase 5, writing the report. This is arguably the most valuable part for the business you're helping. A great report has something for everyone. A simple summary for the execs, a super detailed technical breakdown for the engineers, and most importantly, clear, actionable steps on how to fix everything. Okay, let's switch gears. We've spent all this time talking about offense, how to break stuff, but what about defense? How do we build things to be stronger right from the very beginning? Well, that's where a tool like Selenium comes into the picture. So what is Selenium? In a nutshell, it's a tool that lets you automate a web browser. Imagine instead of having a human click every button and fill out every form on a website to see if it works, you write a script that does it all for you, automatically. It's a huge deal for making sure websites work the way they're supposed to. So why do so many people love Selenium? Well, first off, it's free. You can't beat that. It's also super flexible. You can write a test once and run it on Chrome, Firefox, Safari, you name it. Plus, with something called Selenium Grid, you can run tons of tests all at the same time, which is just a massive time saver.
Okay, but there's always a catch, right? Selenium isn't perfect. For one, it only works for web apps, no desktop software. And it's a bit more bare bones than some paid tools. You have to build things like reporting yourself. And yeah, to do anything really cool with it, you're going to need to have some programming skills.
All right, so when we talk about Selenium, we're not actually talking about one tool. It's really a whole family of tools, a whole toolkit, and each piece has its own special purpose.
And this is the whole suite. You've got the IDE, Selenium RC, which is the older one, the more modern WebDriver, and Selenium Grid for running things at scale.
And this slide really shows you how things have evolved. WebDriver is what everyone uses today, and for a really good reason. It talks directly to the browser, which makes it way faster and more reliable than the old RC, which was like this clunky middleman. Honestly, WebDriver was a total game changer.
So let's break it down really simply. You'd use the IDE if you just want to do a quick record and playback test. You'd use WebDriver when you need to write some serious, powerful tests from scratch. And you pull out Selenium Grid when you need to take all those tests and run them everywhere on every browser all at once.
All right, so we've seen the attacker's side of things with pen testing, and we've seen the builder's side with Selenium. Now let's tie it all together.
Look, at the end of the day, you can't just pick one. It doesn't work that way. You need a rock-solid defense, right? Building high-quality stuff using tools like Selenium. But you also need a sharp offense, using pen tests to poke and prod at those defenses to find the blind spots. They're two sides of the exact same security coin. You need both. And that brings us to one last thing to chew on. In this constant back-and-forth battle of cybersecurity, who do you think has the harder job? The attacker, who only has to be right once to get in, or the defender, who has to be right every single time to keep them out? It's a tough question, and the stakes just keep getting higher. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to talk about building a fortress, not with stones and mortar, but with a plan. A blueprint to protect your organization's most valuable information from pretty much any threat that comes its way. Now, this isn't about getting rid of every single risk. That's impossible. It's about creating a smart, resilient defense.
Okay, so here's our game plan for today. We'll start by defining what we're up against, then we'll walk through how to build your defenses, plan for survival, handle an attack while it's happening, and, what to do to rebuild after a disaster.
All right, first things first. Any good fortress builder has to understand the terrain and the enemy, right? So let's lay that foundation and get clear on the core ideas we're going to be working with. So let's talk about risk. It's not just some vague idea of bad things happening. No, it's much more specific. It's the actual probability that a particular enemy is going to use a specific weak spot in your defenses to cause damage. It's a calculated chance. And a vulnerability, well, that can be almost anything. Yeah, it might be a software bug, but it could just as easily be a server room door that doesn't lock right, or even an employee who's a little too quick to click on phishing emails. Just think of it as any crack in your fortress wall. See, a crack in the wall, that vulnerability, is only a problem when there's an enemy, a threat who can actually take advantage of it. It's the combination of those two things that creates real danger. You gotta remember, if there's no threat, there's no risk. Okay, so we've got the lingo down, but how do we actually use these concepts to create a real, formal plan to defend our fortress? Well, that is where the risk management process comes in. It's this really clear four-step cycle. First, you just identify everything that could possibly go wrong. We're talking everything from a hurricane to a hacker. Then you assess how bad it could be, choose a strategy to deal with it, and finally, you have to justify why your plan is the right one. So when you're assessing risk, you kind of come to a fork in the road. Do you go the qualitative route, where you basically tell a story about what an attack would do? Or do you go quantitative, which is all about the numbers, trying to put a hard dollar amount on the damage? And, in the real world, a lot of people lean towards qualitative because, let's be honest, putting an exact price tag on something like data is, well, it's really, really hard. But look, none of this works if you don't even know what you're protecting. You can't defend your kingdom if you don't know where all the treasure is buried. You have to start by creating a super detailed inventory of everything valuable, from hardware and software to your people, your processes, and of course, your data.
Okay, so if we're going to try that quantitative, numbers-based approach, it all starts with two simple questions. First, what's our treasure actually worth? That's the asset value, or AV. And second, if a dragon attacks, what percentage of that treasure is it likely to burn to a crisp? That percentage is your exposure factor, or EF.
And here's what that looks like in practice. If you multiply the asset value, let's say you've got $1 million server, by the exposure factor, let's say you'd lose about 20% of its value, you get your single loss expectation, or SLE. In this case, that's a $200,000 hit from just one single incident.
But how often does that dragon actually show up? That is your annualized rate of occurrence, or ARO. So if it only attacks once every 2 years, your ARO is 0.5. And with that number, we can finally calculate the big one, the annualized loss expectancy, or ALE. That's the total cost you should probably budget for this specific risk every single year.
And this final number, the ALE, this is your North Star. With an annual risk of $100,000, you now know exactly how much you can reasonably spend on defenses. This calculation prevents that classic, painful mistake of spending a way more to protect something than the thing is even worth.
So once you really understand a risk and what it might cost you, you've really only got 4 moves you can make. You can avoid it, just stop doing the risky thing. You can transfer it, that's what insurance is for. You can mitigate it, build up your walls and reduce the impact. Or you can just accept it and decide the potential loss is a cost of doing business you're willing to live with.
All right, having a plan on paper is one thing, but it's totally useless if you don't practice. This next part is all about making sure your whole organization is truly ready for the worst. It's time to start drilling for battle.
Now, people mix these two up all the time, but the difference is huge and it's critical. Think of it like this. Business continuity is about keeping the lights on during the crisis. Disaster recovery is about rebuilding the power plant after it's over. One is about survival, the other is about recovery. Honestly, your entire survival strategy really boils down to answering these two questions. First, your recovery time objective, or RTO, is about time. How many minutes or hours can this system be offline before it gets really bad? Second, your recovery point objective, or RPO, is about data. How much data can we afford to lose? A day's worth? An hour's worth? The answers to these two questions shape absolutely everything. And that's exactly why you do what's called a business impact analysis, or a BIA. It forces you to identify your crown jewels. It makes you ask those tough questions. What systems, what data, what processes are absolutely essential for us to stay in business? This analysis sets the priority for your entire recovery plan.
Okay, change of pace. The alarms are blaring, the flashing lights are on, you are under attack, like right now. What do you do in this exact moment? This is the plan for when your fortress is actively under siege.
You need a playbook, a simple 4-step plan. First, notification. Figure out what's happening and how bad it is. Second, response. You gotta contain the damage, stop the bleeding. Third, recovery. Get things back to normal. And fourth, and this is so important, documentation. Write down everything you did and everything you learned so you'll be stronger next time. All right, the immediate fire is out, the battle is over, for now. But the fortress has taken some damage. Now comes the slow, methodical process of disaster recovery, of rebuilding those walls and hopefully making them even stronger than before. And recovery is so much more than just hitting restore on a backup. It's a careful process. You need a command center, you need clean systems to rebuild from. And here's the part people sometimes forget. You have to patch the hole they got in through before you go back online. If you don't, you're just inviting them right back in. Only then do you start letting your authorized users back into the system. And, that really brings us back to the whole point of all of this. At the end of the day, the goal is not to eliminate every single threat. You can't. It's about understanding the risks you face and then bringing them down to a level that your specific organization can actually live with. So that's our explainer, And it leaves you with a really important question to think about for your own organization's plan. What's your strategy? Are you trying to avoid threats, transfer them, mitigate them, or are you just accepting them? And maybe more importantly, are you really truly prepared to execute that plan when the alarms start ringing? Ever stop and think about how huge companies actually protect all their data? I mean, in the crazy, complex world of cybersecurity, if you're just reacting to threats, well, that's a recipe for disaster. It's pure chaos. So today we're going to talk about how you bring some order, some control to all of that. All right, let's get right into it. Think about it. If you don't have a plan, trying to secure your information is, well, it's just a mess. Where do you even start, right? What's the most important thing to protect first? And how can you possibly know if you've done enough? It's like trying to navigate a forest without a map. You're just lost. And that is where security blueprints come into play. See, the solution is to use these established frameworks, these models and standards. You can think of them like the architectural plans for a digital fortress. They give organizations a structured, proven path to follow, so they're not just, guessing and hoping for the best. So here's the game plan for how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the foundational blueprints. Then we'll dig into the more technical models, the actual schematics. After that, we'll talk about who's writing all these rules. From there, we'll shift gears into management, and finally, we're going to tie it all together by doing a deep dive into a really big one, ISO/ISE 27002. All right, first up, the foundational blueprints. It's like this. Before you build a house, you have to agree on what a door is, right? What a lock does, where the walls go. That's exactly what these blueprints do for security. They're the big picture concepts, the core principles that everything else is built on. They define those key goals, things like confidentiality and integrity, that are going to guide every single decision from here on out. Okay, so once we have those core principles locked down, we can get into our first type of blueprint, the architectural security models. And if the foundation was all about the why, these models are the technical schematics that really define the how. How do you actually build a secure system from the ground up? So way back in the early days, there were really two major models that set the stage for everything. Over on one side, from the US Department of Defense, you had TCSE, which everyone just called the Orange Book. And on the other side, coming out of Europe, you had ITSEC. You can kind of think of them as two different schools of thought that eventually came together. Even though they started in different places, both the American Orange Book and the European ITSEC really paved the way for the single international standard we all use today. The Orange Book, TCSE, it was famous for its really straightforward rating system. Basically, systems got evaluated and then assigned a letter grade, from D for minimal protection all the way up to A for verified protection, which was the absolute highest level of trust. It gave everyone a really clear, easy-to-understand way to classify a system's security. So all of this evolution naturally led us to what we have now, the Common Criteria. This is today's big international standard. It basically took those old models and harmonized them for our global world, creating a brand new shared language for talking about security. Now there's some lingo here, but it's pretty simple. The thing being tested, that's the target of evaluation, or TOE. What it needs to protect is the protection profile, or PP. What it claims to do is the security target, or ST. And finally, its score, its rating, is the evaluation assurance level, or EAL. Okay, so a question you might be asking is, who actually makes these blueprints? Who validates them? Well, that brings us to the official standards bodies. You can think of them as the trusted architects of the entire security world. Two of the biggest names you'll hear are NIST and ISO. So NIST, that's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is a U.S. federal agency, and they provide a ton of absolutely fantastic free resources, especially their famous Special Publication 800 series. Then you've got ISO. That's the International Organization for Standardization. It's this independent, non-governmental group, and it's basically a global federation of standards bodies from over 160 countries. They develop standards for, well, pretty much every industry you can think of. All right, so we've got the blueprints to build our fortress. Awesome. But how do you actually run the thing day to day? I mean, a fortress is totally useless if you don't have guards, rules, and procedures, right? And that's exactly where security management models come into the picture. And it's really, really important to get this. These management models are not just about the tech. Not at all. They're focused on the practices, the procedures, all those day-to-day things you have to do to keep things secure over the long haul. It's really about how you make security a part of your organization's DNA, how you live and breathe it every single day. And yeah, there are a bunch of well-known models for this. You've got the ISO 27000 series. We're going to talk more about that in a sec. There are the NIST security models, of course. And you'll also hear about frameworks like COBIT, which is all about governance, and ITIL, which is focused on IT service management. Okay, so to make all this theory feel a little more real, let's zoom in and get our hands dirty with one of the most widely recognized standards on the planet, ISO/IEC 27002. Now, this standard didn't just pop up out of thin air. It's got a pretty long history. It actually started out as a British standard called BS 7799. Then, in 2000, ISO adopted it. It got a refresh in 2005, and then in 2007, it was officially renamed to what we call it today, ISO/IEC 27002. So yeah, this long journey, this evolution, it gives it a whole lot of credibility. At its very heart, this standard is built on 3 fundamental pillars. You probably heard of it. It's called the CIA triad. First is confidentiality. Pretty simple, making sure only the right people can see the data. Next is integrity, making sure only the right people can change the data. And finally, availability, making sure authorized folks can actually get to the data when they need it. That's it. Confidentiality, integrity, availability. So let's take a quick peek under the hood at what this standard actually covers. Think of it like a master checklist for all the crucial parts of security. You've got stuff like risk assessment, which is all about finding your weaknesses before the bad guys do. You've got access control, making sure only the right people have the keys to the kingdom. And then there's business continuity. That's your what if the worst happens plan. It's basically a complete playbook for defense. But after all this talk about models and standards and controls, there's one critical piece we just can't forget. A blueprint is just a piece of paper, right? This quote says it all. Policies are totally meaningless without people. People to create them, people to understand them, and, this is the big one, people to actually follow them. So we're going to leave you with this final thought. All these frameworks, they give you the map you need to navigate the crazy, complex world of information security. But a map can't walk the path for you. At the end of the day, the success of any security plan, any journey, it always comes down to the people who are leading the way.